our team and our programs and what we do. And around the state, this is a map of around the state, all the aquatic preserves, of which there are 41. So our office manages a 7 aquatic preserve, which encompasses 6 counties, along with our Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection. We also, under that, are all the 3 NERRs, which are the National Estuarine Research Reserves. Rookery Bay on the Gulf side, Southwest Florida. Then we have Apalachicola NERR, National Estuarine Research Reserve up in the Panhandle, and the GTM, the Guano-Talamato Matanzas National Estuarine Reserve in St. Augustine. And we also have the Coral Reef Conservation Program and the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, all of which are on those blue dots on the map. More specifically to our program today, on the right-hand side, you'll see the area of our 7 aquatic preserves that our office manages. And a different view of that is our 7 aquatic preserves on the map in the yellow over there. So like I mentioned, we have 7 aquatic preserves that encompasses 6 counties. We have 97,000 acres, a bunch of spoil islands, over 150, closer to 200. So our emphasis is on research, stewardship, and outreach. Some of the monitoring research that we do is on seagrass, especially live natural oyster reefs, some bird nesting stuff, and I'll go into detail on all this, horseshoe crabs, and diamondback terrapins. But you can see our zone that's blown up on the map on the right. Quite a large area jurisdiction for us for 5 employees, but we do our best with the resources that we have at hand. So little information about estuaries. I'm sure you all know this, being friends of the MRC. So we're dealing with a brackish water estuary. We have 3 basins that we cover. That's the Mosquito Lagoon, the Indian River proper, and then the Banana River. So we're going up and down the eastern seaboard for 160 miles, so 6 counties, Volusia County down to Palm Beach County. You might know that the average depth of the IRL is about 3 to 4 feet, minus, of course, the intercoastal waterway, which is dredged to about 10 feet. We got an extremely biodiverse estuary, of course, over 4,000 species of plants and animals. So we have our hands full, but we have such a cool diversity. So here's a couple definitions of estuaries in case I sort of changed what we had mentioned. Some people call estuary where the land meets the sea. I like where rivers meet the sea. There's other definitions of an estuary. And some of the importance of these estuarine environments are they are critical nursery habitats for many bony fishes, cartilaginous fishes. We have a really nice complex food web, a breeding site for many vertebrate species, migratory flyway for the Atlantic flyway. They act as filters and are extremely a good buffer, including the land that surrounds our Indian River Lagoon. Of course, economic importance for tourism, fishing, and all kinds of good stuff. And some of the animals that we have pictured here, some of the vertebrate stuff that we do research on, invertebrate, sorry. All right, so management of aquatic preserves, research. Like I said, there's 3 pillars in what we do. We do research and monitoring, education, right? Because you could do all this research, and what good is it if you don't get it out to the public? It's so important. I mean, publishing is so important in biological research, but getting it out to the public is so vital, right? We can't take it with us as we need to share it with others. And then stewardship, that fancy word of just, taking care of the land and teaching others how to take care of the land and be good stewards or caretakers of the land, whether it's the barrier island, lagoon shoreline up from the mainland side, or these spoil islands. How can we best take care of them, and how can we teach people to take care of them? So those are our 3 pillars. So some of the monitoring that we get to do, which is quite fascinating. We do a lot of bird monitoring. So Caitlin mentioned my background is in ornithology, bird research, avian research, whatever term you want to use. And then bivalve research is what I've been doing for the last over 10 years here in the Indian River Lagoon Aquatic Preserves. So those are the 2 things. And, I have to stop myself if I get too bird crazy during this presentation, like I sometimes do. But we also monitor diamondback terrapins, horseshoe crabs, seagrass, oyster, meaning natural reefs, And then we do a lot of permitting and advisory capacity for other NGOs and city and county folks trying to do restoration, and then our spoil island management, leave no trace, and some other projects that I'll talk about. On the right, that picture is a natural reef, typical of the Indian River Lagoon, natural reef that's on spoil islands, which is what we call a fringe oyster reef. Unfortunately, that's a transect line, a tape that's laid out for that, in that particular case, about 40 meters. And that's a really beat up reef, which is what we're seeing, these ephemeral-like qualities with our oyster reefs that are found on spoil islands in the Indian River Lagoon for multiple, reasons we haven't quite teased out in the data yet of what's affecting these natural oyster reefs. But that actual oyster reef has now diminished to where we can't even call it an oyster reef. And that change has happened within the last 8 years. We started monitoring that reef 6 or 7 years ago, and now it's to a point for the last 2 years we can't even monitor it because due to the lack of oysters on those rocks and oyster clumps there. So it's literally disappearing, if not disappeared now. Sad commentary on oyster reefs in the Indian River Lagoon proper. So bird monitoring, some of the stuff that we do is super fascinating. Or on these spoil islands, this is what we call rookery monitoring. Rookery is where these wading birds nest, but on the spoil islands, we can have colonial nesting species, which would include our seabirds. So I use those terms, which wading birds meaning the egrets, ibis, herons, spoonbills, and then the seabirds, including brown pelicans, double-crested cormorants, would be our colonial nesting seabirds. And that photo is a picture of wood storks, a federally threatened species that nests on one of our spoil islands. That's in Brevard County. That island in 2016 was designated as a CWA, which is what we call a critical wildlife area. It's the only second critical wildlife area that we have in the Indian River Lagoon proper. The other one you all might be familiar with is in Martin County, and on an island called MC2, Martin County 2. So this one is in Brevard County. It's number 49. On the left, you see white ibis, a common bird in the lagoon with its chick. They have a black downy plumage when they're young. And in the small picture is a spoonbill and a wood stork right next to each other. The spoonbill in the state of Florida is a state-listed threatened species, and the wood stork is listed as a federally threatened species. However, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is looking to delist the wood stork, so they're doing an evaluation of populations of the wood stork to potentially delist them as a federally threatened species. So on these rookeries, they're super active. We do on this critical wildlife area, we do a monthly monitoring to look at their populations and overall nesting success. To become a critical wildlife area, a lot of people are like, well, we have islands, close to my home in Brevard County. There are spoil islands. To become a critical wildlife area, you need to check 3 boxes to become a critical wildlife area. We have rookeries that are spoil island rookeries, but to become a critical wildlife area, you have to have a high density and diversity of species. It could be wading birds. Some of our critical wildlife areas in the state of Florida are for gopher tortoises. We have one that's for cave, that's for bats. Most of them are for birds. So a density and diversity in bird population, and also including some state listed or federally listed species that are using the island. And the third caveat is these islands have to be prone to human disturbance. Thus, if they're made into a critical wildlife area, that human disturbance can be alleviated by the status of being a critical wildlife area. Stronger enforcement and greater signage to keep people off of that area if it happens to be a spoil island. Okay, moving on to a different style of birds. These are our ground nesting birds that we do research and monitoring on, both of which are state listed species. The picture with the orange bill on the right, that's the American oyster catcher, if you're familiar with that bird. And then the least tern on the left, and then a picture I'll show you later. Another bird we work on is called the black skimmer. These are, the least tern is a colonial ground nesting bird in that they nest densely in these colonies right on the ground. However, the American oyster catcher is what's called a solitary shorebird nester. So they nest by themselves. And what we see in the Indian River Lagoon is the American oyster catcher being very territorial. Pairs will nest on one spoil island, one pair only, and they'll often exclude other oyster catchers from other islands in the general area, meaning the next island up or down from them. They'll just push them out of their territory completely. So true to their name for solitary shorebird nesters, their nest is literally a scrape, which could be on sand or shell hash in this case in that picture, sometimes on riprap. So it's literally just a depression that they make with both male and the female taking turns incubating. So those are our ground nesting species, which have their own suite of challenges with management, right? Especially being these highly camouflaged, almost invisible nests. Any kind of disturbance of people walking on these islands, people can walk and crush their eggs, or even getting close with their boats or kayaks, paddleboards to these nesting areas, they can flush the birds off the nest. So it's a hard thing to manage for. One of the cool things that I'm super proud about that we do, we started a American oyster catcher banding research project. This is alongside our partners with FWC, specifically the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, which is the research side of our Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So we were trained in juvenile oyster catcher banding, which is what you see on the left. And that's a juvenile oyster catcher that was banded with us and our partners. So what we do is it's called a band recite research program. So these birds are banded, the identical bands on both their left and right legs with code that you can read spot with a spotting scope or a camera from afar, and then report that information. These bands are meant to be seen from the field, so you don't have to recapture that animal to know to know what individual that is. They're all individually specific, meaning that bird is there's only one, as you see at that X57, there's only one X57. So our banding effort is mainly on banding juvenile oyster catchers. We are not the motherlode of American oyster catcher population for the state of Florida. Unfortunately, we only have about 450 nesting pairs for the entire state. The great areas of nesting and production for this bird come out of the GTM St. Augustine area, Ponte Vedra, St. Augustine, GTM, NER, and also Cedar Key, and then in Southwest Florida. From Mosquito Lagoon, Volusia County, down to Palm Beach County, we have only about 12 nesting pairs of this particular bird. So that's a really sad commentary of the population of this particular bird for the Indian River Lagoon, where y'all live and are supportive of. So the American oyster catcher, you might ask, okay, do they only eat oysters? Is it because there's no oysters, or the oysters are populations or natural reefs are declining? Well, they can switch their diet, so they're more of a American bivalve catcher, as I like to call them. They will eat mussels, our rib mussels, our hooked mussels in the lagoon. They'll also eat juvenile clams, and they'll switch to benthic invertebrates, so some marine worms they'll eat. If they can catch shrimps or amphipods, they'll also catch those too. So their population decline is not associated with a food paucity in food or resource limited. Their population is directly impacted by the lack of undisturbed nesting habitat. And undisturbed, I emphasize being undisturbed by human disturbance. So that's what that's what keeps their population so low, is just having, so little. They used to nest on the beaches, around dunes, all up and down the Indian River Lagoon on spoil islands, but with development and more higher populations with people, more boats on the water, they are their nesting areas, suitable nesting habitats have declined drastically for the Indian River Lagoon. Okay, so what do we do about trying to create some habitat? This is a project we worked on here. Our office is in Fort Pierce with our 5 folks that we work with. We have boats that we trailer, so we're all up and down the Indian River Lagoon, trailering our boats to the different aquatic preserves. Some of our backyard work, we call it, is in Fort Pierce. This is on a storm protection island in the city of Fort Pierce, where we're able to get some of the vegetation removed. So the least terns and the American oyster catchers, these ground nesting birds, as you might imagine, they're nesting right on the ground. So they don't like vegetation or trees because it ruins their ability to view, potential predators and such. So they like 25% or less vegetative cover. So we went out to this island. We've done this. We did this for 5 years with some intensive habitat management for the last 3 years, removing the vegetation to that bare soil sand layer. We even bucketed up shell hash onto the top of this island. You can see in the picture on the right. We made about 3/4 of an acre of suitable nesting habitat for the least tern, this colonial ground nesting bird. Then you can see that speaker in the back. We broadcasted we made a sound system that's solar powered. We broadcasted their calls of the least terns. We put up decoys that you can see on the right to bring them in. We did everything minus offering them bowls of minnows. And for 3 years in a row, we could not bring the birds in. For unknown reasons, really. I mean, we're all scratching our heads. Us and our FWC partners are like, well, why couldn't we get the birds there? And so it's still unknown. We're going to do some small rodent monitoring there in the next month to see if there might be Norway rats or black rats that are coming in there which made the least terns not come in. But with their calls, we had their calls from this broadcast system vocalizing from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which it really brings in the bird. We also have game cameras up on this site too. So we caught on camera birds coming in. We actually saw presumably males, because males do this cool little thing where they do courtship feeding. The males coming in with a fish in their bill, which they'll offer to a suitable female. And we had males coming in with fish in their bills, offering fish to the decoys. But we never had nesting attempts. We didn't have them pairing up and making scrapes on their own or nesting. So we'll keep trying. We'll probably take this nesting season off because we're working on another different area. Okay, so another research aspect involving birds is our band reed site for this beautiful bird, the black skimmer, an amazing colonial seabird. And so we do some band reed site efforts with this particular seabird. You can see how the bird on the left, and these are color-coded by the state, and I forgot to mention American oyster catchers are as well. So the American oyster catchers, depending on what state, will have a different color band. And you notice with our oyster catchers a few slides ago, they had red bands. All American oyster catchers that are banded in the state of Florida are banded with red color bands, and then other states have different colors. So in the winter, American oyster catchers come from everywhere from Maine to New Jersey, North Carolina, come into Florida, and we can see where they're coming from. We recite their bands and get that information back to the researchers and look at dispersal, longevity, how long do these birds live, where are they going for the winter, site fidelity, like do they always come back to the same spot, all kinds of valuable information that you can get from band resites. And this particular bird, these are black skimmers that have come from different parts of our region. The bird on the left is a blue band, so that bird was banded as a juvenile black skimmer up in New Jersey. And what's really valuable for us here in Florida is the bird on the right was as a green band, which it was banded in Florida, but the black skimmer is not banded on the East Coast in Florida, it's banded on the West Coast. So this is done with Audubon and a biologist from Eckerd College on the west coast in the Tampa region down to San Marco Island. So they're banding skimmers over there. But for us, it's really important, especially for funding opportunities. Because of the Deepwater Horizon BP spill, there's a lot of funding available for habitat preservation, conservation of species, and habitat restoration on the West Coast that's directly funded. But biologists we're talking like, well, wait a sec, what if a conservation species uses both sides of Florida? And so we're really monitoring and looking at like how, especially like this particular species, the black skimmer is using both the Atlantic side and the Gulf of Mexico side. So maybe let's talk about research funding opportunities for conservation of lands in the Indian River Lagoon, because this bird is using both coasts. And just that's just one example of a vertebrate species. Like we have sea turtles that are moving on both coasts, shark species that are moving on both coasts. So that movement is very important, and to document that movement is very important for grant funding stuff. One more thing about birds is we have a really cool plastic and bird study going on right now. We're looking at macroplastics. So you probably have heard a lot about, and I think MRC was involved with a microplastic study. We're looking at macroplastics. So we're looking at plastics of a millimeter or greater in size in the gut contents of water birds. Those famous projects with birds were done with pelagic birds, means those offshore birds. So you might have seen pictures of albatross with all this plastic in their gut contents. So the questions that we're asking, one of which is, well, how about these inshore waters? How about these estuarine birds, our pelicans and egrets and you name it, all those water birds that are using the inshore waters, the estuarine environments, are they accumulating plastics in their gut contents as well? So we're getting a good robust sample size thanks to the Florida Wildlife Hospital, which you might know in Melbourne Beach. And we're also finding, beach rat birds, in other words, birds that were found dead on the beach, and looking at their gut contents and looking for plastics in their stomach. The good thing, well, not good thing, but an easy thing with birds for looking for plastic accumulation, those larger pieces of plastics are stored in what's called their pre-stomach and their gizzard. And so you can really find if you're going to find those larger chunks of plastics, it really isn't necessary to look for those larger pieces of plastics in the entire GI or intestinal systems, stomach contents. You can really just pinpoint it on the gizzard. So that's what we're looking at with these. We've only worked up about 50 specimens so far. We're finding, not unsurprisingly, monofilament, braided fishing line, fish hooks, and fibers, and some different stuff in different birds. But we're hoping to get at least 200 birds run through before we start analyzing the details on that. Once we open up the gizzards for each specimen, you can see these students. We filter them through a sieve and look for those macroplastics. All right, let's move on to something besides birds. And so here we have our diamondback terrapin, an adorable little estuarine turtle. This lives exclusively in brackish waters, so it can handle those salty environments. So we have had with our previous coworker started this project, and also she had worked with the Brevard Zoo on the diamondback terrapin research projects, and we've sort of just continued that to see. And surprisingly enough, even though these in other parts of their home ranges, whether it's in Florida or on the eastern seaboard or the Gulf of Mexico, where they like these salt marsh environments, we found diamondback terrapins and captured them on spoil islands that are mangrove dominated. So it's been a surprise. I think we've did measurements, including pit tagging on multiple individuals. I know we're up to maybe 10 or 15 individual specimens. We've gone out the last 2 falls in a row to some hot spots where we've captured these on spoil islands before and have come up with 0 individuals. So we're at a point where we need to expand our study area, because we're wondering if they're what we call trap savvy. In other words, the terrapins are like, oh no, I'm not going to go in that modified blue crab trap anymore, because even though that has some nice fish guts in it, I'm not going to go in there anymore. Or have they moved? So we're trying to look at these home range, site fidelity, and nesting areas on spoil islands. So that's we're looking for partners on that project too. We've worked with Florida FAU on a research project involving this organism before. Fascinating animal. And then we have the Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch, in which my coworker is working and looking on this research project alongside FWC, UF, and especially Sea Grant. So, and these are marking and tagging individuals. Once again, this is a type of biological monitoring where you mark an individual in the hopes that you can later recite it. And this is where we're hoping, we need the help of folks from the MRC to recite some of these animals that have been tagged. I'm sure you probably have heard about Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch and from other stuff going on at the MRC. But so the male and the female's a lot larger and has a larger tag, and then the male behind her on the picture on the left has a smaller tag. Though the caveat to that, or pitfall of these mark recapture studies, though, are that anything you mark, any animals that you're marking in a research project, the likelihood of ever seeing them again is very small. I mean, the recite percentages, depending on what animal you're looking at in wildlife biology, it's really low to ever see them again. Once you mark them, with birds, it's down to like 5% are ever seen again. 10% of all the marked individuals are ever seen again. So that's where it comes into the ones that we do recite. That information is so valuable, and it justifies, putting these markers on a living organism. Okay, and so why are we marking some of these individuals? So this is a shot of the Max Brewer Bridge in Titusville, which is a huge nesting area for this our Florida horseshoe crab, where they spawn, these spawning areas. On the left, you can see what looks like little white globs on some of those individuals. Those are acoustic tags. So we're working with what's called a FACT network, where we use acoustic telemetry, which are these towers in the water in which these marked individuals that have transmitters make a ping on those receivers that are in the water. And the reason that we're doing this is that bridge is slated for and is in the process of, because they got their permits to do some wave attenuation devices, what we call WADs, on the I think it's the south side of that bridge. So these giant concrete wave attenuation devices, in order to help some of the major erosion that's going on. Y'all are probably even more familiar with that bridge than I am. You have major erosion going on, which Department of Transportation is, of course, concerned about. So they want to put these wave attenuation concrete devices out there to protect, to decrease the erosion. And all of a sudden, horseshoe crab folks, including our folks from our office and FWC, were like, whoa, let's wait a second. Do you realize that's the largest, besides the Gulf and the Cedar Key, where there's major spawning locations for this organism? That for us on the East Coast in the Indian River Lagoon, that is it. I mean, that's the hot spot. I mean, currently, historically, we had some major spawning areas, but as far as where we can go to annually during spawning events, we know this is the spot. How are those wave attenuation devices, these big concrete slabs, how are they going to affect the ability of those organisms to get to shore to spawn? So we were able to work with the permit and get some revisions on that permit design to allow some gaps and in the design of how and the height of those wave attenuation devices to allow movement for horseshoe crabs. And the reason that these particular, we put about, I think it was 15 transmitters on 15 individuals to see, well, are those horseshoe crabs staying in that area by the Max Brewer Bridge? Or are they going on the other side of the bridge? Or are they going on very far away? And so some of that data is still coming in, but we are seeing a lot, some site fidelity of those individuals. So not just during spawning events are those horseshoe crabs there. They're, living a majority of the year in that general vicinity because of the pings. Another cool reason of having those receivers in the water is that FAC network not only picks up any those animals with transmitters on them like horseshoe crabs, there's also bony fishes that have those transmitters on them, like snook have those. I think some people even have them on cartilaginous fishes. Red drum have those transmitters on them. So those pole receivers are getting pings or notifications that tell who what animal it is and what marking and what individual it is, and so we can then spread that give that information to other partners on the FAC network, looking at stuff just in addition to horseshoe crab. So it's a really cool project. We also do some seagrass monitoring. We've been partnering with the St. Johns River Water Management District for probably over 20 years now. We have some brilliant scientists, seagrass biologists there with the Water Management District. We do their methodology, their protocol, because they are the experts in this, but we do seasonal, both winter and summer seagrass monitoring for 10 transects, meaning a line, as you can see in this picture on the right, transect line, which is just a meter, 100 or 200 meter tape that we pull out from the shoreline out to what we try to find is the edge of the bed of the seagrass. So we do 10 set transects in St. Lucie County and Martin County. Water Management District, their biologists do transects all up and down the Indian River Lagoon. And this is the vital source of ground truth, on the ground biological monitoring of seagrass that we can use to look at the health of seagrass in the Indian River Lagoon, along with the mapping that the Water Management District does as well. I'm sure you all at the MRC have seen some of the seagrass maps. If you've gone to this Indian River Lagoon Symposium, those biologists are always reporting on densities and extent and health of seagrass beds in the Indian River Lagoon. Well, this data that we do in the water is used for those reports. And yeah, so we're getting ready to go out and do ours, even though seagrass becomes senescent or goes dormant in the winter. We still go out because you can still get seagrass presence in the winter time, and it's really gives us a good idea. I mean, I don't know how many transects the water management does for the entire Indian River Lagoon, but even just that 10 that we are involved with really helps us just get an eye for ourselves, because we do these same lines, these same 10 transects twice a year, every year, so we know them intimately, and then it gives us a really good idea for questions from the public and people like your NGOs who are always asking us, how's the seagrass, and people at boat ramps, how's the seagrass, because everybody is getting to understand that this seagrass, the habitat, is the bread and butter, the driving force for the Indian River Lagoon. I mean, it's everything. It's more important of an ecosystem habitat than oyster reefs or clam beds or mangrove forests. I mean, seagrass as a habitat it's everything. I mean, it works in conjunction with other habitats as well, of course, but it is the bread and butter. If you want to look at different estuaries across the state of Florida for the Indian River Lagoon, seagrass habitat is what drives us, which is what drives other organisms as a nursery habitat, and so on and so forth. So yeah, back to that question, people are, well, how is seagrass doing? It really helps us because we can say it's so site dependent. I mean, we can have two of our transects doing really well in St. Lucie County, and then get Martin County, where we're not trying to beat up on Martin County, but two of our transects have not rebounded in the last 8 to 10 years. And we're just seeing, very, very little seagrass in parts of Martin County. And then, depending on the year, some of our St. Lucie transects are doing well. And then 2 years later, they're not doing well. So it's so site dependent. And so anybody who comes out and says, seagrass is coming back great in the Indian River Lagoon is not telling a whole story. Or if anybody who says, seagrass is dead and it's gone and it's not doing well, that's not the whole story either. There are parts of the lagoon where seagrass is rebounding, and including multiple species. Some of the taller canopy forming species is rebounding in some areas. And we're seeing, we have a delisting or downlisting of one species that we were calling a federally protected species is officially not a native species, and that's the Johnson seagrass. We're also seeing a movement of another non-native species, Stipulaceae, that's being found up in our part of the Indian River Lagoon too, which is disconcerting and a whole nother story. But yeah, the transects really give us a good idea of trying to answer those questions. How is seagrass doing? Which is such a complicated, it's not, you can't just give somebody a one sentence answer to that question. Okay, let's move on to oysters. So our office is we've really worked we collaborate with the Smithsonian Institute because we have lucky to have those partners right here in Fort Pierce, the Smithsonian Marine Station in Fort Pierce. So we've got these great partners, and we're looking at natural oyster reefs in Indian River County and St. Lucie County. So we've monitored those for the last 8 years. Here's the rub. So in those last 8 years, we had, 10 oyster reefs that we've monitored. We are now down to the only being able to monitor 4 of those oyster reefs between Indian River County and St. Lucie County. I know that's out of your Brevard region, but we're now down to only being able to monitor 4 of those reefs. The other 6 have declined so drastically. There might be a few individual oysters on some clumps or on riprap, but they're no longer reef. They're no longer fit that criteria to be called a living oyster reef in as far as a minimum size criteria, which we use. We want to look at something at least 10 meters long to be able to monitor. But even we'll try to monitor things that are smaller than that, but we don't even have the coverage of those beat up oyster reefs that have gone by the wayside. Now, will they come back? I mean, that's something we're trying to figure out. And what is the reason that those oyster reefs have declined, are something we're also trying to figure out. And some of the things we've looked at and teased out of the data is that it's not a lack of food. There's plenty of phytoplankton in the area there's plenty of food for the oysters. Limited substrate. The substrate is still there, so it's not a limiting substrate, meaning they still have a hard bottom to settle on to start their life processes. So it's not the substrate and it's not the food. Is it water quality, which is always a concerning word for me because it's water quality. I like to use water condition. Is it really the condition of the water? Because is there something in the water that's harming the ability for those oysters to not only settle and recruit, but to survive? We're seeing a lot of evidence of oysters in the Indian River Lagoon starting their life, even settling and then recruiting, but then making it past year 2. We're seeing high mortality events at year 2, and then making it to year 3 as viable oysters or even of reef form is really, it's becoming less prevalent in the Indian River Lagoon proper. And I mean the estuary part. And the rivers is a different story in the Indian River Lagoon. And when I mean rivers, I mean the St. Sebastian River and the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. Those 2 river systems, not the lagoon, but those 2 river systems have healthier natural reef populations. And then speaking of the oysters, of course, we monitor oysters in the Mosquito Lagoon, and I'm separating that out from the Indian River Lagoon and considering that a different basin. So if you ask about the health of the oysters in the Mosquito Lagoon, it's a completely different basin, and oysters are doing much better up there, and heavily monitored thanks to UCF and Linda Walters and all her great research, and those are partners up there. So back to the stuff that we do. So we also work, and under working under DEP umbrella, we have our office, but separate from our office is another office of compliance and permitting. So we work with compliance and permitting because some of those folks, they know the rules and regulations of permitting, but sometimes they don't come from a strong biological background, or they're often not in the field. So we're able to work with them to provide commenting and areas of expertise of what could work possibly, and what some of the lessons learned that we've learned for living shorelines and mangrove planting, salt marsh planting, oyster reef, low profile oyster habitats. So we review those permits. They'll send us those permits, especially when the permit is in, not especially, but the ones we, our high priority ones are permits that are looking to get permitted within the aquatic preserve. We look at some other ones as well, but say someone's trying to get permitted for a living shoreline in the aquatic preserve, that comes down our pipe, and we'll review that and provide our comments. The frustrating part of that, I'll be the first to admit, is that working for DEP, our aquatic preserve, as a manager, I'm only allowed to provide comments on that permit. So my word is not the hammer chiseled in stone. So I can provide comments on that permit, but the finalization of the permitting process is always done by the permitting and compliance office. But it is super helpful, having, as we know, with other state agencies, collaboration, coordination, just downright communication amongst agencies is so critical. And so that permit review is also done by our partners at FWC too. So they'll look at areas, and they're looking at the same things that we are. We're looking at what are they going to, with this permit, what are going to be the impacts to submerged aquatic resources, including oysters, clam beds, and seagrass beds, and mangroves. All right, I need to speed it up here. Ooh. All right, so some of the things we also do are on our spoil islands are managing them for recreation use. These are all dredge spoils. Like I said, we're managing close to 200. It's hard to be anywhere and everywhere at any point. So we do our best. These signs were designed by our previous co-worker who did really hard work on getting these designed and put out for the public to see what the spoil island, who our partners are, what to do and not to do while you're on a spoil island. Our great partners that her name is Emily Dark. You probably met her from partnering with her. Another, she does great work. She helped us get partnered with the Leave No Trace program, which is, you might have, if you've gone to national parks, that whole nationwide program, especially for national parks, to where to limit the human-caused disturbances of user conflict, I should say. And so we got designated as a hotspot. That's not a good thing, but a hotspot in 2018, meaning the Indian River Lagoon's in trouble. Let's help it. A lot of that trouble is because of human impacts, with human waste, garbage, threatening conservation species. And then our other program, which I won't go into depth because I know, thank you, MRC is helping us get the word out and as an ambassador partner with the Bark Ranger program, which helps people be good dog owners in some of our managed lands. So thank you, MRC, for helping us with that. And then our lagoon friendly landscaping project is a really cool project. So we have so many lagoon centric projects. We're focusing on how can we get this seagrass back to health? How can we get the oysters back to health? How can we help, mangroves and so on and so forth. So, but the big twist in all this is like, how are we managing the water that's coming off the land? Those land use practices are so important to what affects the water condition or quality in the Indian River Lagoon. And some of the, in Brevard County, you all are doing some magical work on, infrastructure changes, water treatment facilities, and septic to sewer, those kinds of things. So changing how the water is before it gets in the lagoon are hugely important. And we've seen lessons learned from the Chesapeake Bay and Tampa Bay of like, if you get the water right before or better before it gets to that aquatic water body, before it gets to the estuary, it then can in turn help those resources that are in the water itself, instead of this way of like, well, let's fix what's in the lagoon. So one of those things is just a cool education outreach focused lagoon friendly landscaping. This is our garden up in Titusville, and it's all about planting natives, less water, and acting as a buffer and a true filter, and then also monitoring some of those organisms that are using that. So my coworker has a cool project looking at a control, which is a traditional lawn across from our garden here, and looking at density and diversity of bees and butterflies in our neighbor's lawn, and then this native butterfly garden. And the data is just, it's night and day. I mean, you don't even, yeah, statistically different results. Okay, and then so we work with lots of interns. If I'm right here, I only have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure I have time for questions. So we're working with all kinds of interns, and except summer internships at our offices, we have alternative spring break coming up with our partners at Florida Audubon. And all kinds of meetings that we go to, which is our office-related work. Here's my coworker on the right, Emily Sermont. If you're interested in working in Titusville on native plant garden, she's your contact for that. And every day is a different adventure. Some of the stuff we do, there are like crab trap removals. We've done, of course, the stranded manatee. We do get entangled wildlife all the time, some lionfish removal, and all kinds of stuff we get to do in the field, some of which is uplifting, some of which is downright depressing. Some take-home messages. This will be my last slide, and we can get to the questions. What can we do? I know you all at the MRC know a lot of these things, but the single-use plastic, eliminating that is, and taking care of our garbage, our carbon footprint, conserving water. And this lagoon-friendly landscaping, of course, is something that we could all kind of do, even in our own backyards. 7 principles of leave no trace that I won't go into, and respecting our wildlife, which is actually one of the principles of the leave no trace, one of the 7 principles. Yeah, and let me get out of sharing mode here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matthew. That was really, really informative. I learned a ton. We're going to go ahead and get started on some questions that we have in the Q&A. So if you still have questions, go ahead and toss them in there. Our first question that we have comes from Elise. She says, horseshoe crabs used to be extremely prevalent along the Fort Pierce Inlet area up until 8 to 10 years ago. What happened?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. And not only that area she's talking about in Fort Pierce. I mean, there's part that's, other parts of Brevard County people, and that's just a reoccurring theme that we hear from, on the ground citizen scientists we used to see. And that time frame that she's talking about is really on par with other stories that were here, that 8 to 10 years ago. So I know our office and also FWC is trying to figure out like why aren't they here anymore? Why are they just delegated now to that Titusville area? And honestly, I don't think they've come up with the reason of why they were there 8 to 10 years ago, and then that they're not here. So now, undisturbed, suitable spawning areas might be part of that, right? I mean, if coastal development is or even wave attenuation devices or whatever they mean, any obstacle to getting to that shoreline, is that part of it? I mean, I think the human impact, it can't be emphasized on this. I think that's part of the problem, that horseshoe crabs might not have a place that's undisturbed or that they can arrive to due to some of the stuff that we're doing.
We have someone else who commented that they monitor horseshoe crabs in Parish Park, and they counted 12,000 horseshoe crabs in 3 hours about 3 years ago. That's incredible. He also mentions that he also monitors water quality at Max Brewer Bridge, and it's been bad. Seagrass have died and not recovered. Oysters and crabs are gone. Most of the fish, crabs, and manatees have died in the Titusville area due to pollution, and the spoil islands are eroding away. So sounds like we're seeing a lot of change in the IRL.
I'll have to add to that person.
Let's see. We're also another comment. Picture of the FDEP native plant butterfly and bee garden. Oh, Bill is one of the gardeners, so good job, Bill. That's amazing. All right. Kevin asks, I used to shrimp net at the Wabasso Causeway. Could the shrimp come back?
Wow, talk about out of my wheel, out of my lane. I don't know. I haven't monitored shrimp populations. That's a really good question for perhaps the folks at the fisheries independent monitoring program, part of FWRI, FWC, who are doing those trawls and pulling nets and finding that and seeing if that they're seeing an increase. But yeah, it's I don't dare answer that question.
Another comment. I'm in the medical device industry where horseshoe crab blood is used alongside sterilization for testing for bacteria. And this comment says that the medical industry should be tapped for aiding in conservation. I think that's a fantastic idea. All righty, we've got another question here. American oyster catcher beaks don't look very suited for crushing oyster shells. How exactly do they eat them?
Favorite question. So let's say my hands the water. They're so smart, and so there's oyster catchers almost pan globally. So there are oyster catcher species that they can actually open up a closed oyster. Imagine that. I mean, we can't do that with a shucking knife. Here's the level of the water. When the water is just barely covering the oyster is down here and gaping. The oyster is open and filtering. Here's the little filtering part. So the oyster is like that. The oyster catcher comes and it puts its bill while the oyster still gape, puts it in there, and severs the abductor muscle before the oyster can close, and then the oyster is done. Without that abductor muscle to close, it's done for. So it literally gets the oyster before, and so the water has to be just above the oysters. So at low tide, our American oyster catcher has a hard time eating oysters, but and in a high tide, they're too deep. So, wow, great question. They're fascinating.
Is there any grant money available to upgrade older septic systems in Brevard South beaches?
Yeah, that is definitely a Brevard County question. I don't know their grant funding opportunities, but I know they are. So they were working on different sections for that septic to sewer. But yeah, that would best to reach out to Brevard County Environmental Resources Department.
Yeah, I would say that would happen for the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program, and there probably is grant money for that. All right, got time for a couple more questions. For the tide spill bridge, can we advocate for a living shoreline instead of wave attenuation concrete devices?
Yeah, so it really is about the intensity of the wave action also compared to the intensity of that erosion. And I'll be the first to admit that erosion is bad when you're starting to take out infrastructure, meaning roads that we're all using as well. The living shoreline, I just don't. I'm not an engineer, but I think they're going big on it just so that it will actually help the problem. I mean, living shorelines do such a great thing for lesser impacted stuff, but when you get to that point where it's so heavily eroded and it's starting to affect infrastructure, and I mean like big, not just one individual's seawall, which a living shoreline could do. When it starts to hit roadways, they'll come in with bigger, heavier duty ideas involving higher engineer and more robust things. So I don't know. I mean, all the living shoreline research that we've done in our office with our partners, I just don't know a living shoreline technique that could handle that type of intensity.
Yeah. All right, and then we are out of time. So just as a last question, if people want to get involved, I know you mentioned that you have internships. Are there volunteer opportunities, and how can people keep up with the cool research you're doing?
Yeah, I can put my contact information in the chat. We have our aquatic preserves on the web as well, but I'll put my contact in the chat. And yeah, any internships, volunteers at the garden, in the water, oysters, birds, and horseshoe crabs. Anything for y'all, your children, college students, grandchildren, what have it. We love to educate. That's really vital, important, very important part of our program. So I'll put my
Awesome.
contact.
Thank you so much, Matthew. As a reminder for everybody that has signed up for this presentation, you will be getting a link to this recording on YouTube. I will also post Matthew's contact information on that as well, too, if you want to learn about opportunities to get involved. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Matthew, for a wonderful presentation. Have a great one. Bye.